Hello and welcome to the Adventures in Arting podcast. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I've been hosting this podcast with my super special co-host and my mom, Eileen Chu Balzer, since 2012. So I'm recording this intro by myself today because we took a very long break, and I have lots of excuses, technical issues, general Sturm und Drang, health issues, like all sorts of stuff that happened in life to stop us. But it's 2025 and we're back with a vengeance. So on this podcast, our goal is to help you develop and maintain a thriving art practice. An art practice is a framework, and much like a garden trellis, you use your art practice framework to help your artwork grow in a particular direction. So if you love the podcast and you want to go deeper, I hope you'll check out the wonderful community at myartpractice.com, where our motto is create, connect, and thrive. MyArtPractice.com is a membership site that offers early and mid-career artist community and art education. So membership is going to reopen at the beginning of April, and you can visit myartpractice.com to sign up for the waitlist so you don't miss out. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get on to our guest, Mary Correa, and meet up with Mom in the studio. Mary Correa is our guest today, and she is an award-winning mixed media artist and instructor who is passionate about helping others find their creativity. As an artist, she is always working to expand her knowledge and skill, and as an instructor, she's able to help artists of all skill levels find their creative expression. So Mary's work has been featured in many publications, including Somerset Studio, Artgerling Magazine, Cloth Paper Scissors Magazine. She is the founder of Artish Creative Retreats, a Central Florida-based art retreat, and she has taught all over Florida, as well as on all sorts of international and US-based online classes. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I wanted to say that Mary and I met many years ago in Florida at a class I was teaching, and I'm now totally blanking on the name of the store, but I'm sure that you know.
Whimsadoodle.
Whimsadoodle. I don't know how I could forget, but I used to travel to Whimsadoodle like maybe once a year, or a lot of times when I was doing HSN, it was easy since HSN's in St. Pete's and Whimsadoodle's right next door. And so I've met you several times there, and I remembered you very much as a student. And also the color turquoise always comes to mind when I think of you. And then I think earlier this year, you popped up in my Instagram recommendations, and I was like, oh yeah, I love Mary. So I started following you. And when I saw all the wonderful things that you were doing, I invited you to be a guest at my art practice. And you gave us a great little peek into your art practice, which I definitely could relate to. And we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button, because you now have a grown-up child. But you really started your art practice when you had sort of a little child. And I'm certainly not going to make you go into what you covered in the video about how you did time management with a little kid and how that changed things. But I did want to talk a little bit about how you made the leap into being a full-time artist and an artistic business owner. How did that all happen for you? Was it gradual? Was it based on a definite plan? Did it happen by accident?
There was definitely no plan. I had when my son was born. Well, my son is adopted, so we went through a very long process until he got here, and then once he got here, I was all encompassed with him. And so when he was about 3 or 4, is when I decided, I need to start finding myself again. And art and crafting had always been that thing for me. And since we had moved to Florida, I hadn't explored any classes, and I happened to find a class that was in Orlando, and I went and took it, and it was a lettering class. And that was the one thing where I was like, oh yeah, I need to keep doing this. And not just lettering, but it kind of reignited that little piece of me that I had before. So I literally just kind of started playing around. I'd watch a lot of YouTube videos. That's how I discovered some of the other places around town, like where we met at Whimsadoodle. I discovered during that time. And then it slowly started taking over more and more of my life. By that point, I had already left a corporate job. So I was a stay-at-home mom, and it was the thing I could do that would, give me a little bit of myself when I wasn't just momming.
What did you used to do
And
in your
then
corporate life?
what was that?
What did you used to do in your corporate life? What was your job?
I was a corporate trainer at Marriott.
Wow. Was that
So
interesting to you or not interesting? Was it exciting?
it was interesting to me. I if you would have asked 20-year-old Mary if she was ever going to be a teacher, I would have laughed in your face. Um, but since then, I have been a group fitness instructor, a corporate trainer, and now a mixed media artist and instructor. So apparently, I am meant to be a teacher of some sort.
Definitely meant to be a leader.
Yeah. So but it's never anything that I had planned.
Mm-hmm. Well, this also goes with my whole theory of like, I don't think there are wasted things in your life. If you had a previous life, do you know what I mean, as a corporate trainer or as a fitness instructor, or like I have a previous life as a theatrical director, like that isn't like a path that you wandered on and then sort of lost everything when you changed directions. It's like it's part of what brought you to where you are right now. It's like that
Right.
skill set, I'm sure, from being a corporate trainer, do you know what I mean, at Marriott must come into like running these retreats and all these complex things and being a teacher and all that kind of stuff.
Definitely. Definitely. And, just being a corporate trainer taught me how to do a lesson plan. And being a group fitness instructor taught me how to keep people interested in something they don't really want to do.
I think she's met us.
Right? That's awesome. Okay, so you had this previous life and now you have this life, and sort of what is a day like for you? Like, do you work on like a little bit of this and a little bit of that all day, or do you have sort of bingey periods where there are seasons for things? Like what's your sort of creative business life day look like?
I am definitely a little bits and pieces because of I don't think I've ever transitioned out of having the little child where I would have like 15 or 20 minutes. So it seems like my day is always kind of broken up into all these little segments. So, I work on something on my desk and then I have to send an email and then I have to go put a load of laundry in. And then, so it's probably not the most efficient way, but it keeps me entertained. I have a little bit of ADHD,
Mm.
undiagnosed, but I'm pretty sure it's there. And so I think the variety is what keeps me a little more entertained.
Yeah, I've tried binging like multiple times, or I guess they call it batching, not binging. Binging's unhealthy,
Yeah.
batching's healthy. But I've tried batching multiple times in multiple different ways, like different schedules, and I find that if I am supposed to be batching, pardon me, I become enormously avoidant and I start doing other stuff. So oddly, it's more productive for me to do like tons of little activities than it is to like
Yeah.
see if I see that 4-hour block for some like email, I'm like, oh no, I must do 100 things before I do that. That sounds terrible,
It does sound like torture.
right?
Yeah. I think and I think this is one of the things that kind of makes me think I have ADHD is that if I do like the time blocking, I become completely obsessive. And then I'm
Mm.
going to get rid of every email that has ever been in my email box. And I can't turn it off when the time's up. So if
Wow.
I just keep moving,
I was gonna say I need you to come to my house and make it through my email then, because I'm in a desperate place at this moment. So I want to talk a little bit about I saw on your Instagram, not that I was spying on you, but I saw that you gave sort of a business talk about branding. And I would, the art world is so filled with people who do mixed media, and that word even has sort of stopped having meaning in some ways because it's such, you know what I mean, a big field. So, will you talk to us a little bit about, branding and what you do and what your brand is and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah. So I came about that talk somewhat accidentally. I'm part of the local arts association, and we started a series called Artpreneur this year. And I have become the person on the board that anytime they have a new activity, I'm like, we need a logo. We need to brand it. We need to because we're trying to get ourselves more known for what we do. So then that led into me doing the talk about branding. And I am in no way an expert on branding, but I have found out that having a consistent message that you're always giving to the people who follow your newsletter or your Instagram or your Facebook, wherever they may be, that they get to quote know you. So, part of your branding can be your logo, but it's so much more than that. That it could be the colors that you use all the time. It could be um, uh, your messy studio. Like it's the things that people get to know you for. And so to the point that when they think of something, they're like, oh, yeah, that's what Mary does. Oh, yeah, that's what Julie does.
Mhm.
And, you know, for example, I love having pink hair, but it's become part of my brand. So, I'm normally a blonde, and remembering a blonde artist isn't quite as easy as remembering the one with the really weird pink hair. So, branding really becomes so much more, especially in the art world. It's
Mhm.
not just the style of art that you're using and things like that. It becomes more because I feel like people feel like they get to know you on Instagram and on YouTube, and especially those of us who, reveal a little bit about our personal lives or our family lives or whatever, that people feel like they get to know you, and that becomes part of your brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, in a funny way, my mother has become part of my brand.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
I
right?
don't get paid. I don't get royalties.
I know you
What
get paid exactly 0. But because people all the
You
time
get a
are like,
grandchild. That's your payment.
"Thank you." Perfect. Because people all the time are like, "Hey, where's your mom?" Or, "Oh, I love your mom." Or like, and again, I think so many things unintentionally become part of your brand that you don't think about it. And it's like you need that sort of step back to look at who you are, which is such a weird and calculated and uncomfortable thing to be
Why?
like,
It is.
well, so I'm a person. I don't think of myself as a brand. And I just like you're part of my life. Like you're a very important major part of my life. And so of course I include you in things and I have you in things and I talk about you. But then as soon as I take a step back or talk to somebody who wants to like advise me about my brand, they're like, oh yeah, your mom's part of your brand. Then it starts to kind of feel icky. Like it doesn't feel, even though like our relationship is true and all those things are there, once I start to put it into like one of my brand things is me and my mom do stuff together. Like it just feels yucky. I don't know how else to describe
Well,
it.
think of it. This will be an interesting conversation at the dinner table.
Mm,
Uh, but take a step back and think of it this way. Maybe it's part of a larger issue in your brand, which is that you are inclusive. You
mm.
include people, you're interested in new people, you like talking to your students, and it's not a question of me alone, it's really a question of you like other people being part of your practice. And in fact, I think if you were alone in your studio 24 hours a day, you would not like it.
Oh, let's try and find out.
I just think, well, here's what I'm thinking. I'm involved with a lot of volunteer organizations, as are you, and I'm sure Mary as well. And one of the things they always do periodically is they rethink their mission statement, and then they work on how that mission statement is expressed in their activities. And I think maybe as a business, you need to do that too, so that you can figure out what your message is, who your audience is, etc. And it helps you not be all over the place and focus on what it is you want to present. And I think one of the things you present is you like participating in these group things, and group teaching, and you like giving talks, and you like podcasts. And I just think, instead of thinking of me as a terrible burden resting on you, crushing you into the earth, think of me as just part of a group of people
Mm-hmm.
of varying degrees of intimacy with you, whom you enjoy and whom you pull into your work.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, it makes me think like, Mary, your hair could be blue or green or, do you know what I mean? Whatever else. But it's like, is it the pink, or is it the idea that you are playful and, not necessarily traditional, like in that way? And so the same thing, you can kind of extrapolate it out to lots of stuff. But I think it is hard, to think of yourself as a brand, which is why for me it's more comfortable. I've recently divided up my like online life, or I'm in the process of it. I'm consciously uncoupling like myself as an artist from my art education business, because they've been so intertwined, and like I might be very political as myself, an artist, but I might be much more neutral in my art education business. And I might be less willing to answer questions about what I'm working on as an artist, and very willing to answer questions on like the art education side. And it's a funny bifurcation, but I'm sure you go through it too, Mary. But it's like, I think it's something I feel like I have to do at this point to kind of be able to have my own work that I'm working on that isn't commercial, that isn't necessarily something other people want to do, that is just like stuff I'm doing for self-expression, and then kind of the stuff that I need to do to pay my mortgage, and
Right.
to appeal to a wider audience, I guess.
Right. I have had so many questions about that of, do I need to like physically separate teaching and arting? That, and every time I think about it, I try, and one day I will make the decision that, oh yeah, I need to separate them and have, different email lists for different people. And then something will happen, and it makes me realize that no, they're really interconnected. So depending on the day, I agree with you or I don't agree with you.
Well, I mean,
It's
depending on the
also,
day, I agree with me or I don't agree with
yeah,
me. Like, it's very complicated. Sorry,
it's
Mom, I
also
stepped
an
on you.
overwhelming task when you face it. It's like deciding to declutter something, and the idea of going through everything and filling your room with all the stuff that you're about to decide just stops you, because it seems like such a huge job. But like anything else, it's the longer you wait, the bigger the clutter is. I just feel like one of the things is you have to recognize when your business is changing, or when your art practice is changing, or your teaching is changing, and do what's going to make the best result for you, for your students, for your clients, and then just do it. I think businesses have to do that all the time.
It's true. I mean, I think it's like having a child who grows up, you know? I mean, I'm astonished that I have a 5-year-old in the house, because I still think of him as like a little baby. But you have an 18-year-old in your house, and that's certainly an entirely other like. So I took my son to the pediatrician this week, and when we walked into the pediatrician's office, there was a giant, like 6'4". I acknowledge he's a kid. He's in the pediatrician's office, but he had also driven himself there. He didn't have a parent. And then there was another kid with a mustache who was with his mother. And I was like, oh no, what is happening in this pediatrician's office?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the parent who's still with the tall child.
Yeah.
Because so my son's 18, but he's still in high school. So he can keep going to the pediatrician. But it's one of those things where you're like, do I have to go in the room with them anymore? It's such a weird spot that I'm in. And my son's actually going to a new doctor next week. And I'm like, I don't know. Do I, even calling to schedule an appointment and they're like, oh, date of birth. And you tell them 2006 and they kind of like hesitate, like,
Right.
why are you calling for your adult child? And
Right. I mean, it's so
such a weird.
interesting. I have to say, the kid with the mustache went in by himself and then came back out and got his mother. And I said, oh, he came back and got his mother. And my husband looked at me and said, still a kid.
Yeah. Doctor asked a question they didn't know the answer to.
Still a kid. Yeah.
There is that awful moment when at a certain point the law kicks in and the doctor can't talk to you anymore about your
Right.
child's medical issues without his permission. That's a shocking moment.
Yeah. I'm very close there.
Okay, I feel like we cut off the tale of how Mary became a working artist. I want to make sure we get back to that.
You mean the ADHD girl got distracted and we went all around?
I want to say this about ADHD. I feel like it's a sliding scale and that everybody has some elements, I think.
Yeah.
And that maybe the definition is based on a faulty idea of what a quote unquote average normal person is. And maybe, maybe we all have a certain amount of multitasking ability and we don't assume that it's ADHD necessarily. I have no idea. I don't know you. I've never met you before, but I'm just saying, I feel like sometimes people feel it's a negative thing to do this kind of multitasking when in fact, a lot of times I wish I could do it better. And as you get older, which it happens I am, you are less able to do it.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's been hard to adjust to. Okay, back to you.
Back to me. So, how I started moving more into, and it wasn't even a full-time artist, but it was moving from art as a hobby to art as a part-time profession, was basically some of the places that I was taking classes. Somebody in the class would notice and they're like, oh, do you teach? And it's like, no, I just do stuff. And honestly, it took one of the shops asking me if I would do an art journaling meetup once a month. And that's kind of where it all started. That until that point, I was just doing things for myself. And they asked me to teach just this meetup. And it became kind of a big thing there that, so many people would sign up, and then it became twice a month. And I started teaching other things. So it was just kind of a snowball effect. And when I finally took my quote studio space from the dining room table to an actual room in my house, that's when I knew that this was the thing I was going to be doing.
A lot of times people think that the only thing you have to sell is your art, that you've made. But in fact, this perfect example, you had skills that were worth something in the marketplace. And sometimes you have to take an inventory and say, what do I have to sell that might be art adjacent?
Yep. When I was in college, I read this book that I still can't remember the title of, but it was talking about multiple revenue streams. And it's always stuck in my head that you have to have a lot of things going on. So if one's not doing that great, you have something else. Mm-hmm. So if the art isn't selling as quickly as I want, I still have some online classes. And if the online classes aren't selling like I want, I still have, a membership, or I have an in-person class, or so that's one thing that has stuck from college.
I think that's true. I always think of it as like when you're a freelancer, or a business owner of any kind, frankly, like your income is a table, and the more legs that it has, the more stable the table is, and so that's always a good thing to think of. And I do think that sometimes it can be like, oh, I have 3 products, so I have 3 legs. But I tend to think of it more as like physical product, digital product, service. Do you know what I mean? Like you're thinking of areas that you offer so that when the market dries up somewhere, it's fine. I was talking to my hairdresser the other day, and she was talking about how she runs a recession-proof business. Hairdressing is known as one of those things where like people have to
Yep.
pay whether they've got money or not because they
Yep.
want their hair done. Period.
Yep.
Right?
Beauty and liquor, they're recession proof.
If we had more liquor, we'd need less beauty, I guess.
Funeral director is recession proof.
Funeral director is recession proof. That's true. We could probably think of a couple others. And I do think that it made me think a little bit about how do you make something that is as necessary, do you know what I mean, as getting your hair done. And some of it is, I think about like, well, why is this my business and not my hobby? And I don't know if this is true for you. I'm reading a little bit between the lines, but it feels like it's because it's a compulsion, because it's a like thing that you have to do to be happy, because it's a thing that like exists in your bones, and like when whenever I am grumpy, like my husband will often be like, why don't you go to your studio and make some art? Like, and I know it's not because he's trying to get rid of me, but he knows that like that will change my mood. And I know it about myself too, because that's why I always have like an art project in my bag. And it's actually been probably the hardest thing about having a child. I love my son. He's amazing. He's perfect. He's tremendous. But like, I just don't have the downtime to do like a little project or to sit quietly in front of the TV and stitch or like whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, and I'll warn you, it's coming. It'll come quickly because now my thing in the evening is British murders and a stitching project. So
British murders.
Give me a good British murder.
Right?
They solve them all in an hour and a half.
Oh, so I know because I listen to a lot of like murder podcasts. I hate to say that out loud, but I do. And I watch a lot of like Midsummer Murders and stuff like that. And I know now that when I look at some of my work, I can like hear what was happening, or like I get the basic plot of the murder is now like mentally attached to the work. Does that happen for you?
Yes. So it hasn't happened because I don't watch murders when I'm working. But I have a painting that's on display right now, and the name of the painting is the painting formerly known as Stevie Nicks, because it started as an abstract, and I was listening to Stevie Nicks, and then somehow it morphed into a floral, so it didn't seem like it was Stevie Nicks anymore. So it had to become the painting formerly known as Stevie Nicks.
I like that. Now, speaking of florals, you do a lot of nature related things. Is that a big inspiration point for you?
It is. And I keep trying to tear myself away from it. And then I beat myself up for trying to tear myself away from something that's obviously inspiring. But it's one of those things where it's like, do I need to paint another floral? And apparently the answer is always yes. Because even when I start with an abstract, somehow it morphs and becomes a floral or a landscape. One of my favorite places in the world is Hawaii. So I have a ton of pictures. So a lot of my landscapes are based on my photos from Hawaii. And of course, I live in Florida. So I have flowers and greenery around me all year. So I can just kind of go out in my yard and that's what I see. So I think that does drive me. Even my abstracts tend to be pretty organic. And I think even those are influenced by what's around me.
Do you think if you went someplace less tropical, have you found, top of a mountain somewhere, do you think you would get reinvigorated with the plant life? Because it's so different?
I don't know, because the other series of photos that I took on a vacation, we were in North Carolina, and we were on the top of a mountain, looking out into a valley. But still somehow when I look at it, I know it's North Carolina, but when I look at it, I think that could have been Hawaii too. So it still kind of just sneaks in there. And I've never been anywhere really desert-like, so I haven't had that inspiration yet.
Might be
Um,
interesting for you if you ever find yourself in a different physical environment to see how your
yeah,
art changes.
yeah.
Although I am so curious as to why you feel the need to push yourself away from florals and landscapes, especially since those are like that's the work that is the most saleable too.
I know. I think there's always that little voice in my head that is saying, oh, you should try something different. You should push yourself a little farther. You should. And my florals have definitely changed over the years, but there's always that part of me where, you know, I want to be a quote, serious artist. What does that mean? I don't know. But that's what the little voice in my head says that, do I want to be Salvador Dali? Do I want to have some sort of political statement in my artwork versus a vase of flowers?
Well, I mean, Van Gogh painted a lot of vases of flowers. I mean, I would say the sunflowers are a part of his like oeuvre, right? And yet he is a serious artist. Georgia O'Keeffe painted flowers. Like there have been many
Yeah.
artists. I'm doing I have a lesson coming up on Chagall and like thinking about all the flowers and stuff that he painted. Like I think like yes, flowers are art with a capital A.
Yeah.
I
And,
wonder
and I
again.
think,
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's one of those things that as artists, we get stuck in our head that, oh, I should always be pushing. I should always be different. I should, would it open me to a different market? Would it, get other people interested in my artwork? Would people take me more seriously? And I think it comes with being an artist. If you aren't questioning yourself, then you're probably not questioning yourself. It's kind of one of I remember hearing a saying that if you think you're a bad mom, you're not a bad mom because bad moms don't think about it.
Oh, I like that.
So I think it might be the same way with artists, that if you aren't questioning yourself, then you're not a good artist. And by good, I mean what you consider good.
Well, it's also there's so much conflicting advice, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, okay, don't always do the same thing because that's really boring and you should push yourself to try new things and not just do one thing. But wait, also do just one thing and get all the expertise you can so that you do that one thing really, really well. But also remember that you need to do multiple things in order to keep people interested, but they should be related. But also don't make them too related because then it doesn't seem like, and it's like, oh my gosh,
Right. Oh, and remember, you have a brand.
yeah, on top of it all. And I think like at the end of the day, like that's part of the reason that I really think you sort of just have to be true to yourself because none of the advice is all of the advice, because I don't think there is one path, one way, one truth. And there are so many stories of like, well, this person succeeded by doing something totally what you shouldn't do. And that person failed by doing exactly all the right things. And so I think the problem when you follow the formula, right, is that you may not end up where you want. I mean, there's a Katharine Hepburn, maybe it's a quote, maybe it's a misquote, but I'm going to attribute it to her, where she said, if you always do what you want, at least one person is happy. And I think about that sometimes because I remember when I was a young 21 or 2-year-old, I think, and The Lion King was on Broadway. And it was Julie Taymor, who was in her late 40s, early 50s, maybe at the time. And she had been doing these huge puppets in like regional theaters for a long time. But then this Broadway production of The Lion King came and like people's minds were blown. And she was like the person. And, but the fact is she was just doing the work that she had always done. But the time had come for people to be ready for it. It's not like she suddenly pushed in a different direction. And I've sort of tried to keep that in my mind at all times, which is that When you chase the market, it always runs away from you. When you chase somebody else's idea of good, it always runs away from you. When you start creating work for the likes on social media, like, you're in trouble. Part of what is so difficult about being an artist in this age is that it's not that it hasn't been hard for artists of all ages, because they have obviously had to create art for a market, but it's just more in your face every day, is that you really have to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say is a lot of times this advice is based on what will sell. And a lot of this advice comes from people like gallerists and art critics who have a particular thing that they want to sell. I remember, Julie, you had the opportunity to show some work to 3 different gallerists here in Boston. And uniformly, one of the first things they always said was, you need to work bigger. Why? Because that's what sells, and that's what sells for more, is these giant paintings. But you have to have then a different kind of studio, etc., and you think differently about your work. I just think, consider the source, and often the source is people or organizations that have an investment in work that they can sell. I just think
so true.
Yeah, in the end, you have to do work that satisfies you.
Well, it's also the idea that, like, you never know whether your work is good if you're always waiting for validation from other people, right? Because then they're in the studio with you, but they're not actually, so it's impossible to know, because you lose your taste, because you're like, wait, is this good? Is this not good? Like, you have to know. And like, there are times I know that, like, I will send you a picture of a piece of work late at night, and you will say something, and I'll be like, well, I'll think of some words that are not nice about you. And I'm just saying. And then I'll remember that, like, your opinion is not the opinion of God. Like, your opinion is your opinion. I know.
Is no, that's right.
I mean?
I am telling you for my taste.
Yes.
What I see or what I think. And I would assume that the fact that you keep sending me this stuff, like at 11 o'clock at night or whatever, means you're at least interested, in my opinion, even if you don't care for the result.
Well, the thing that I know is that your taste in art is not what I make. And I know that you love me, and like the sun comes out of my butt and all that kind of stuff. But like, if I look at the art in your house, like, you tend to be more interested in art that is more quiet. You tend to be interested in art that is more sort of clean and architectural. You tend to be interested in art that is more representational. Like, all those things are art that you tend to be more interested in. So like, I always feel like if I send you something that I know is not your jam, and you like it, it's probably because there are some things about it that are universally like. It probably means it's more graphic. It probably means I've gotten my values right. It probably means that the color palette's more pleasing and sophisticated. It probably means, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like a good bellwether for me or something like that, to be able to figure out where this is sitting. And sometimes I obviously disagree with you. Sometimes I agree wholeheartedly, but because I know your taste, it's like I'm very much able to sort of judge where I am on a spectrum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like art that has mystery. A closed door with maybe a bit of light coming out through the bottom, something like that. I like art that doesn't give me the whole story and makes me work for it.
Yes, and you like representational work, and I get it. And I love so much of the art that's in your house, but it's just not the kind of art that I make.
So your brother can inherit it all? Is that what we're getting to?
My brother can inherit it all. Put it in a van and take it to LA. It's not that I don't like it. I just don't make it. Does your family like your work, Mary?
No.
So do you ask them for critique?
No. I didn't grow up in an artistic family. I grew up my mom loves to bake. My dad did a lot of like sketching. He taught me to sketch when I was little, but he did a lot of wood carving.
That's all of that I consider artistic.
Right. But
Baking,
they,
woodwork.
right. They didn't, I don't know how to explain it. They didn't, for example, my dad liked to whittle because when he was younger, he was sick and in bed a lot, and it was something he could do. But we didn't seek out like exhibits about woodworking.
Mhm.
So I didn't have a huge artistic life outside of the things that I did at home, as far as seeing what other people did and things like that. Um, and so, although again, my parents love me and they love that I create art, but a lot of the times the question I get asked is, "What is it?"
That's a
So, um,
common question that artists get, right? What is it?
yeah, yeah. So my florals, my mom loves because she knows exactly what they are, and she doesn't have to think about them or dig any deeper into them. It can be just a pretty vase of flowers. My husband is an accountant, so I think that kind of explains everything when you're an abstract artist, and you're married to an accountant. His favorite
Maybe
art genre is photorealistic,
you should
which
try
I am not.
sneaking a number in somewhere in a hidden place in the painting to see if he finds it.
Well, I do have, so eight's my number because my birthday is August 8th, so eight has always been my number. So all my artwork has eights in it somewhere.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I should grab like some spreadsheets and start using those as my collage and gel print on them and things like that and see if that would be more interesting
Pique
to
his
him.
interest. Yeah.
That's it. I was thinking actually that I feel like your work feels personal, like it has story in it. And would you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my most recent kind of move has been I've always, before this, I had done collage and I had painted, but for whatever reason, I had not merged the two. And lately, I've started merging the two where I'm layering. And my most recent exhibit was called Torn Fragments.
Mm.
And so a little bit of it was the torn paper that was in it, but then part of it too was kind of this idea that what you're seeing is a little fragment of my life on to that piece of art that either for good or for bad, it's just a little piece of me that was kind of torn away and left there on that canvas. And depending on when you meet me, you may understand that piece or you may not, because we're all changing and evolving. So depending on when we meet and when I produced a piece, it may be confusing once you get the behind the scenes story.
Interesting. And do you tend to work in series? Because it sounds like this was work for an exhibit that was sort of all made thinking of a similar idea.
I had never worked in a series before, or I had never intentionally worked in a series. So my work, I worked with a business coach one time and I was asking her specifically about this, like, how do you work in a series? Like, I want to do this and then I want to do this. And I never, like most of us, I don't finish one painting. Like I always say, they have to go sit in the corner and think about themselves, and then I move on to something else. And uh, one of the most recent paintings I finished, I had started 6 years ago, and it's been sitting in the corner, and I just never really liked it. And then one day, I was at the right spot, and it was time to go. And within 2 days, I had it finished.
That's
Um,
awesome. I can't remember who
Julie
said it, but
does that.
I do that. I think we all do. But some of our famous artists once said, paintings are never finished; they're only ever abandoned.
yep, I've heard that before. But yeah, I've never intentionally worked in a series, but last year I got asked to do this solo show at a local coffee shop. And when you sign up for things that are a year away, you're like, oh, no problem.
Never
It's a
happen,
year
right?
away. What's the worst that could happen? So most of that work was produced in the 3 months leading up to that show. So that was the first time I worked in a series because I basically painted myself into a corner, and I had to. And I had already, given them the details because I had this great idea for a show, and had given them, a description of it. So then everything had to fit in. So
Ow, you must have been running, just like frantically getting it all done.
yes, and the day that we went to hang the show, we hung and I work fairly big. Um, I think my largest there was 30 by 40. So it takes up a lot of space, but this coffee shop had a lot more wall space than I was expecting. So we had one spot that had a light on it that was empty. And she's like, "You got anything else?" I'm like, "Well, I got one that's halfway done on my easel." She's like, "Can you have it done by Friday?" I'm like, yes, I can.
Or
So,
duct tape a banana to the wall.
Right.
I know. Well, for me, it would have to be like a bunch of flowers duct taped to the wall. So at least it would be on brand.
Right. And how was
No
the
necessary.
show?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, like when you looked at the show as a whole, were you like, it feels complete, it feels like it's telling a story? Did you feel fantastic about it?
I did. I will say that because I work in a one-room studio that's in my house. I live in an older house, not quite as old as yours, Julie, but 1925. So there isn't a lot of space. So my artwork doesn't get hung up everywhere, especially because it's so big. A lot of it gets stacked over in the corner. So this was the first time I was able to see more than 2 or 3 pieces hung together at the same time.
That must have been
So
wonderful.
it was really, I mean, obviously I painted them all, but when I looked at them all, like I could see the lines that carried through each of them, even though they were different, but I could see that line that went through all of them, which I had never seen before because I hadn't seen them all at one time.
You
That
know, when the
sounds so cool.
biographer writes the monograph about you and your work, they'll find all kinds of things that maybe even you weren't aware was there.
Yep. Yep.
Did the exhibit change anything for you? Like, did it prompt any realizations or push you in any particular direction?
Well, one thing it really did was because I divide my day between painting and recording videos and sending out newsletters, but those 3 months I was so focused on painting that it really reminded me how much I love that part of it.
That's great.
And I kind of, in my head, I always kind of divide my time up like, you know, and it always skews a little heavily to the teaching instructing side because that just takes more. You've got to, write syllabus, and you have to do, your marketing graphics, and you have to contact places to teach and all of that kind of stuff. So that tends to be the heavier side of my business. But after finishing that exhibit, I've purposely tried to flip that and make the painting a little more of the heavy side,
Yeah.
and trying to streamline some of the other things that maybe they won't take quite as long anymore.
Yeah, I think like that's my personal dream, which is someday, like I'd say my balance is probably like 85 or 90% business time and like 10 to 15% like actual art making time. And I would love to get that closer to even like 60-40, let alone 50-50. So that's like, that's my when I'm older and my child's older and everything's older, then I'll
Is
be able
that
to
when
do that
when
someday.
you decide that it's worth the effort to train someone to help you with some of the more mundane tasks?
When I
Yeah.
have faith to believe that I could make enough money to justify hiring a human
Right,
being, that's
right,
really that's a leap of faith that's beyond me at this moment.
right. Because
Yeah.
it's one of those things. If you have the person, will you get more art done,
Right.
or will you get more art done and then hire the person? I one of the things I think is you have to always decide what is worth to you
Hmm.
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hard to have someone come to your house, but let's say you had a studio elsewhere, then
Mhm.
you'd be more likely to allow someone to come in all the time. But then on the other hand, with your child, you need to be able to work in your house while your child is sleeping,
Mhm.
or
Right.
homesick or whatever.
Mhm.
So it would be very inconvenient not to have it in your house. I mean, I just think there are these things you juggle, and your life is not going to stay the same. It hasn't stayed the same.
I wouldn't
I mean,
want it to stay the same. It's true. Even in the good times, it's like
Right.
something's always changing. As they say, the only thing, that's absolute in life is change. That it will happen whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
I do want to, before we run out of time, I do want to talk about your Artish creative retreats.
ah,
Will you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that?
are you
I
saying
am. Yeah.
ish?
Sorry, I'd
Yeah.
say
Art
art
ish.
dash ish.
Ish. Okay.
So the ish is one of those things that I know Julie has certain things that she says when she's teaching, and it just comes out. So it seemed like when I was teaching, somebody would be, they would ask me a question about an art journal page. And I would say, oh, have you tried this or have you tried this? And then they would ask, well, how much? And my answer was always like, ish. So it kind of naturally evolved. So it's the art-ish creative retreats. And I typically host them around the Central Florida area. They're 3-day, fully immersive retreats that we do. Um, a lot of it is mixed media. We've done a gel printing. We've done Camp Craftapalooza last year around the holidays. So it's 3 days. We provide food, we provide transportation. So once you get into town, we tote you around. We usually do field trips to either museums or we've done parks to do sketching. We've taken texture prints off of trees. The last one we had a texture field trip to the dollar store. So everybody got $5 to find items to make texture on their gel plates. So a lot of fun. They're very small, no more than 15 people. So we get to know each other really well, and we have all of our meals together. So they're really, it's kind of the part of my business that I love because I get to know these people so well. And they come back over and over and over again.
I was going
Um,
to say you must have groupies who go all over the place to
yeah.
be taught by you.
Oh, yeah. They definitely do. And one of the things I do for every retreat, there's custom name tags. So I handcraft name tags differently for each retreat. And so when people get to the retreat and they see somebody who has more name tags than them, they're
Ah,
constant, so like the first 15 minutes is like, what's that one from? And what's that one from? And of course, I have an assistant who helps with workshops and retreats. I can't pay her full time just yet, but she helps with big events, and so of course she has all of the name tags from every retreat we've done. So she's always popular because people want to see all the ones from previous years.
That's such a great idea. And I have to say, like, I remember that Florida was full of people who made art. And like those were classes that always sold out and always had tons of people. So you must have such a wonderful art community available to you.
I do. And I mean, a lot of it came from the people I met at Whimsadoodle because that was such a I always joke that those people that I met there, there's no other place I would have ever possibly met. And some of them have become such dear friends, but it did. And it just keeps expanding. I keep finding new people, but and I wonder always if it's because kind of the average age in Florida that people are to the point where their kids are grown, they have a little more discretionary income, they have some time, they may be newly retired, those kinds of things. I've always wondered if that's what kind of leads us to having a larger base here.
That's a good thought because I was going to say, especially because people who have the money and the time to go to like an immersive event, those are definitely, you're talking people in that kind of 50 plus, 60 plus kind of age range. And that's definitely the sweet spot for me for people who come to my retreats too, and so I think, yeah, Florida's a great place for it.
Yeah.
Well, before we completely wrap up here, Mary, I just wanted to loop back to the question that we, of course, wandered away from, because that's also my way too, which is just talking, since the podcast does kind of focus a little bit on, your art practice and what your life is like as an artist, like do you have any rituals when you go into the studio? Do you have like a typical day, or is it always different?
Are you burning bunches of sage to rid the studio of bad juju?
Sometimes, yes. That, and I do have a little sound bowl, so sometimes the studio needs a little bit of cleansing. If especially when the clutter gets a little overboard, sometimes we just need a full reset and we need to clear some energy.
Mm-hmm.
So typically when I walk in the studio, I always have coffee with me. I try to come in here fairly early in the morning. And by early, I mean for me, because remember, I have an adult now in my house. And before that, we homeschooled, so I could set the schedule. So we are not an early folk. So usually 10 o'clock, I'm wandering into the studio with my coffee. I can, I turn on, I have twinkle lights everywhere because I love twinkle lights. So I have to turn those on right away. And then typically I will grab like a composition book and I have to do something in it. It's almost like a creative warm up for me, just to kind of get me in the flow, get me moving. Even if that whole day is nothing but computer work and newsletters and answering emails, I still need that 10 or 15 minutes, even if it's just, scribbling in a composition book or trying out a new marker that I bought or swatching out some paint that I bought, whatever it is, just to do something creative to start the day.
That's a good thing. So I have to say, so the next cycle up at my art practice is all about rituals. And so I've been thinking a lot about like what you do to get ready. I read a book, God, it's got to be 2 years ago, that I rolled my eyes at really hard, but now I'm thinking I shouldn't have rolled so hard. Where this woman, it was a watercolor book, and I think her name is Katarina Ewing, I think. And she talks about how like she has a ritual when she goes in to make work, about like how she like lays out her supplies and how she sort of does everything, and she puts on this music and it like gets her in the mood, right? And I was sort of like, whatever, that's so dumb. Like, you just do it. Like, why do you have to have a whole thing? But the more that like my life gets busy and things get crazy and it gets harder, the more I realize like that you need to make your art space, whether it's your kitchen table or your art studio or whatever it is, like you have to get into a sense of place. You have to like not just like rush into it. And I've, tried a bunch of different things. So I'm always interested in hearing, is it the moment when you like turn on the twinkle lights that it's like, oh, I'm, ready to create, or is it the moment when that first sip of hot coffee hits, or maybe you're in Florida, it's iced coffee, and you're like, now, do you know what I mean? I'm ready. And
Right.
I don't know.
Kateri Ewing.
Yeah.
K-A-T-E-R-I
Maybe that's right. Yeah,
Ewing,
yeah.
E-W-I-N-G.
Yeah, yeah.
And on her website, the phrase that she starts with is "Art is for everyone."
Yes.
Love
That's
it.
exactly who. Yeah. Well, Mary, where can people find you if they want to stalk you and, pay attention to all the kind of art you're making and maybe come to one of your retreats?
So pretty much everywhere I am Mary Correa Studios. So my website is marycorreastudios.com. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, I am Mary Correa Studios. So somewhat easy to find.
Very easy to find. I feel like you have an unusual name. Are there other Mary Correas? Have you ever found any?
Yes, so there is one in Argentina because I get tagged, and she is also an artist because I get tagged in a lot of her photos.
Interesting. That's crazy.
And it is actually it's my husband's last name, and it's a fairly common Puerto Rican name. So it sounds unusual, but to them it's not.
There you go. Who knew? That's awesome. There is another Julie Balzer wandering around, at least one or two, which was also surprising to me. It's part of the reason I use my middle name.
They're not artists, right?
No, there's one who comes up a lot who's a nurse. I don't know about
I,
the
I
others.
do remember when you first started Balzer Designs, and it was balzerdesigns.com or something, and there's a person who's a tailor who's Balzer Designs.
No,
and
who has the blazer? He has an email that's Blazer Designs because he's a tailor. And so
he used to
sometimes
get
I get his email and sometimes he gets mine. But yes. It's exciting. Anyway. Okay, so no more confused identity. Mary, thank you so much for being with us. And I hope everybody will check out your work.
Yes, thank you so much. Glad to see you guys.
A pleasure.
So if you want to connect, please find me at juliebalzer.com or all over social media as @BalzerDesigns. Please sign up for the free weekly newsletter. That's the best way to make sure that you keep up on the latest news. And there's a big button on the homepage of juliebalzer.com where you can do that, or you can go to the show page for this podcast to find the link. And if you'd like to help the show, and thank you so much, you can always leave a review, mention us on social media, or tell a friend. All of those things help other people find the show, which helps the show to grow. So thank you so much for listening and subscribing, and we'll see you the next time on the Adventures in Arting podcast.